Hari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivadadari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivadadari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivadadari. Gopi Janavalabha Girivadadari. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Can I get a Bhagavatam? Thank you. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 4, Text 25. Deho Savo Ksha Manavo Bhuta Matram Atmanam Anyam Cha Vidu Param Yat Sarvam Puman Veda Gunamsh Cha Taj Gyo Na Veda Sarva Gyam Anantam Ide Deho savoksha manavo bhuta matram. Atmanam anyam cha vidhu param yat. Sarvan puman veda gunamscha tagyo. Na veda sarvagyam anantam ide. Deho savoksha manavo bhuta matram. Atmanam anyam cha vidhu param yat. Sarvam puman veda gunamscha tagyo. Na veda sarvagyam anantam ide. Deho savoksha manavo bhuta matram. Atmanam anyam cha vidhu param yat. Sarvam puman veda gunamscha tagyo. Na veda sarvagyam anantam ide. Deho savoksha manavo bhuta matram. Atmanamanyam cha vidu param yat. Sarvam puman veda gunamscha tagyo. Na veda sarvagyam anantam ide. Bhuta matram. Atmanamanyam cha vidu param yat. Sarvam puman veda gunamscha tagyo. Na veda sarvagyam anantam ide. Deho savoksha manavo bhuta matram. Atmanamanyam cha vidu param yat. Sarvan puman veda gunamscha tagyo. Na veda sarvagyam anantam ide. Deho savoksha manavo bhuta matram. Manamanyam cha vidu param yat. Puman veda nantam tachyo. Na veda sarvagyam anantam ide. Uttamatram. Param yat. Veda gunamscha tagyo. Sarvagyam anantam ide. Matram. Param yat. Sarvam puman veda gunamscha tagyo. Veda sarvam nantam ide. Actually the word for word. Deha, this body. Asavaha, the life heirs. Aksha, the different senses. Manavaha, the mind, understanding, intellect, and ego. Bhuta matram, the 5 gross material elements, and the sense objects. Form, taste, sound, and so on. Atmanam, themselves, anyam, any other, cha, and, vidu, know, param, beyond, yat, that which, sarvam, everything, puman, the living being, Veda, knows, gunan, the qualities of the material nature, cha, and, tatgya, knowing those things, na, not, Veda, knows, sarvagyam, unto the omniscient, anantam, the unlimited, ide, I offer my respectful obeisances. Translation: because they are only matter, the body, the life airs, the external and internal senses, the five gross elements, and the subtle sense objects, form, taste, smell, sound, and touch, cannot know their own nature, the nature of the other senses, or the nature of their controllers. But the living being, because of his spiritual nature, can know his body, the life airs, the senses, the elements, and the sense objects. And he can also know the three qualities that form their roots. Nevertheless, although the living being is completely aware of them, he is unable to see the Supreme Being, who is omniscient and unlimited. I therefore offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Purport: Material scientists can make an analytical study of the physical elements, the body, the senses, the sense objects, and even the air that controls the vital force. But still, they cannot understand that above all these is the real spirit soul. In other words, the living entity, because of his being a spirit soul, can understand all the material objects, or, when self-realized, he can understand the Paramatma, upon whom yogis meditate. Nevertheless, the living being, even if advanced, cannot understand the Supreme Being, the Personality of Godhead, for he is ananta, unlimited in all six opulences. Om Agyana Tamarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Prijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I wanted to thank everyone for letting me give the class, but also for this really great time being here. It's been really amazing. And I wanted to ask that devotees forgive any offenses I may have committed, and I don't feel like I deserve to be here, but it's been really great because all of the devotees are so kind, and it's really nice. So thank you. So in this verse, hopefully we can dive into it a little bit, and also hear from the devotees who are listening. So Daksha is reciting these prayers, which we heard recently. These prayers already existed in the Vedas, but he understands them, and he actually is speaking them for the pleasure of the Lord. So I found it a little hard to understand this verse at first, but we can just go through it. Because they are only matter, the body, the life airs, the external and internal senses, the five gross elements, and the subtle sense objects, they cannot know their own nature. So because all these things are matter, They can't know about themselves. They can't know about the nature of the other senses or the nature of their controllers. So they can't know anything because they're just dead matter. Like we have the book, Life Comes from Life. And we're always hearing how matter is dead. It's dull. It can't think or be conscious. But life is actually coming from life or Krishna. So there's that verse, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. There's one supreme eternal who is expanding into unlimited eternals. But the difference is that that one supreme eternal is providing for all of those unlimited eternal beings. So life is coming from the spirit soul. And because of that, the spirit soul, or the actual personality, is able to know about other things, such as all these material things that we just listed. But those things cannot actually know themselves. I heard one lecture where my Guru Maharaj explained it really nicely, very succinct, where he was saying that the body lives never, but the soul lives forever. So matter is always dead, but the spirit soul is always alive. Like Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, never was there a time where you, nor I, nor all these kings did not exist, nor is there a time where any of us will ever cease to be. So the spirit soul doesn't come into being, it won't end, it's eternal. So matter can't know itself, but the living being, because of his spiritual nature, can know all of these things. His body, the life airs, the senses, the elements, and the sense objects. And he can know the three qualities that form their roots. That's the three modes of material nature. Nevertheless, although the living being is completely aware of those things, everything coming from everything that's material, everything that's subordinate to the living being, like when Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita about material nature, he says, but there is a superior nature, and that's the living entities. So they're superior to the dull matter. And so Daksha is saying, nevertheless, although the living being is completely aware of them, he is unable to see the Supreme Being. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, can't be understood by material senses. There's a nice verse that explains this that we'll hear again tomorrow, but it's really perfect. Atav Shri Krishna namadi nabhaved grayam indriyai sevan mukhe hijivado swayam eva sparatyada. As long as one is situated in duality on the central platform, gross or subtle, realization of the original personality of Godhead is impossible. So, with we talked a bit about this in the last class that I had spoke, how the material scientists make so many claims, and we're seeing that in the purport, that material scientists make an analytical study of the physical elements, but still they cannot understand what is above these, the real spirit soul. So there's so many nice things that can be understood with science, and you can get telescopes and all sorts of machinery and equipment to see more about the material world. But the problem with it is then they go like beyond their capacity. They try to claim they can do more than they actually can. So yes, we might be able to use a telescope to see the moon a little bit closer, or so many things, harness nuclear energy and make batteries and helpful stuff. But then once there's claims saying, now with our new telescope, we can see the beginning of the universe. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but people believe it because these are the authorities that are accepted today. So people can take the authority of the Vedas, and I won't go into this so much because we spoke on it last class, or we see otherwise today people are just taking the authority of these materialistic scientists. So they'll say things like, we made this new telescope, I saw this recently, and this telescope is so powerful that it can see 14 billion years ago and see the beginning of the universe. And people just believe this, but it doesn't really make very much sense. We know from... There's probably some nice ways to defeat that very logically. But so they say that there's light coming from planets, and this light is taking a long time to travel. So if we look at that light, then we can see back in time. And by looking at this, we can determine for sure that everything came from nothing. There was just a big explosion and everything came out of it. So these are pretty strange theories, but it's what everyone is believing today. But we're seeing and hearing here that if with materially contaminated senses one cannot know even the spirit soul that is themselves, but what to speak of the supreme spiritual being, or the origin of everything, Krishna. In other words, the living entity, because of his being a spirit soul, can understand all the material objects, or when self-realized, he can understand the Paramatma, upon whom yogis meditate. Nevertheless, the living being, even if advanced, cannot understand the Supreme Being, the Personality of Godhead, for he is ananta, unlimited in all six opulences. So Krishna can be understood to the degree that he allows the devotee to understand them. And that happens through performing devotional service. So by engaging in Krishna's service, since he is above the living being, then he can choose to actually give knowledge of himself. Like there's a really nice verse, Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritiporvakam tadami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayantite, where Krishna is describing that as they worship me and surrender unto me with love, I reveal the path by which they can come to me. So ultimately it's up to Krishna. He's the boss. So by serving him and pleasing him, he can reveal himself to the devotee. So it's not that the subordinate tiny jiva soul is going to force Krishna to reveal himself by any amount of telescopes, microscopes, yogic processes, austerities. But it's actually only by pleasing him, by engaging in his service. And Krishna also describes in the Bhagavad Gita that service is joyfully performed. So I read a little bit of a lecture that Kadamba Kanana Swami was giving on this particular verse. I took some notes, so I'll just see if there's anything. Oh, there was this nice verse that was referenced from the Madhya Lila, where it was describing, here, I'll just read it. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunoi Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karya Udoy, which is saying, when his original consciousness becomes awakened, then the living being is always in direct contact with the Supersoul. So, by actually awakening our original consciousness, our Krishna consciousness, that's how one comes to know Krishna, because they're doing things as Krishna wants them to be done, not just as they want them to be done. And then he reveals himself to that devotee. Are there any comments or questions on this verse so far? Anything that devotees would like to add?
I'm almost there, but not.
Okay, cool. Let's see. I took a few other notes. So, in this point of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Daksha is praying to the Supreme Lord, and it's for a good reason. He's doing his duty to try to. His duty is as a progenitor, so he's making so many of the living beings in the universe, and it's for a good reason. He wants to bring great exalted. He wants to create many great beings in the universe. So he's praying to the Lord to give him the power and the potency to do this. But it's not pure devotional service. He's not just praying to the Lord in a selfless manner out of love, like what Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu shows by his example. But there's some personal motive. So I just took a nice quote from this class that I was reading the transcription of from Kadamba Kanana Swami, where he speaks on that point, and I thought it kind of summed up a lot of it nicely, specifically about how Daksha is praying with some personal motive. It's not just pure devotional service in this section right here. So in the class he was explaining, in these verses, Bhagavatam has not yet fully disclosed the ultimate conclusion that simply pure devotional service to Krishna for his pleasure is the only aim in life. Srimad Bhagavatam is leading up to that understanding. First, in these Hamsaguya prayers, we are totally reminded of how we are not this body, not that we are not this body, but how we are not this body. Because as we're seeing here, it's describing all of the material elements, how they can't know themselves, but we can know them. But then we can't know the Supreme Being just by our own personal endeavor. It's by service to Him that we know. That is very important. The tendency to identify with the body is so strong. Sometimes even a great devotee will be influenced by the bodily relationship. Arjuna became influenced by bodily relationships. His bow was slipping from his hand. Yudhishthira Maharaj became influenced when Dhritarashtra left home. Then Yudhishthira Maharaj felt great sadness. After all, Dhritarashtra was the one who had brought him up. Bhagavad Gita calls for that broader vision, that vision of our eternal relationship with Krishna. That vision where, as spirit souls, we don't actually have a relationship with this material body. In these verses, the same message is reiterated to us in preparation to unalloyed, pure devotional service, which will be elaborately revealed in the conclusion to Srimad Bhagavatam. That's also a nice point here that was being spoken about in that class, is that the Bhagavatam isn't understood by devotees just like piece by piece, or reading it from wherever they want, whenever they want. Like Prabhupada often made the point that many professional reciters will just jump to the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam just for the sake of making like some pleasing show that people are interested in and pay money to come and hear. But we see from Srila Prabhupada's example and from the acharyas that actually the proper way is reading it from start to finish. Because the whole time it's leading us, it's building our understanding of Krishna. It's compared to like the first canto. Sometimes you'll see it stacked on a book table. The first canto is like the lotus feet of Krishna. And when the devotee comes and has darshan of the Lord in the temple, they're looking at the lotus feet of the Lord, and then gradually working their way up to seeing the smiling face of the Lord, which is the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And that makes sense. That's a respectful way to view the Lord, not just jumping right to the face of the Lord. And if we do that, then also we won't understand. Because first, there's so many things that need to be described. Like, I was listening to one class that my Guru Maharaj gave, where he was explaining that some people, I think it was after a Rath Yatra, some kind of rough people that they were coming back from like a football game or something like that, saw the devotees taking prasadam and wanted to go speak to them and try to ruffle their feathers. So, and they were holding cans of beer and all of this. So they pointed at Lord Jagannath and they said, "So this is your God?" And then my Guru Maharaj told them, "Well, before we talk about God, let's first get to know ourselves." And then they started speaking on, that we're not this body. How can we know that we're not this body? What's the difference between spirit and matter? And in this way, they actually became kind of interested and had a nice conversation and asked some questions, and it went nicely. So these kind of things are actually needed before we can understand anything about the supreme spiritual being Krishna, who, as Brahma describes in his prayers, has an eternal transcendental form, full of bliss and knowledge. First, we need to start off with understanding these things. What's the difference between spirit and matter? who are we? What's the body? What's the soul? Karma? All of these things. There's so much to know. So there's so many different cantos of the Bhagavatam that lead up to then showing that Supreme Person and what he does, his pastimes and all of this. But also, that's also shows the potency of Srila Prabhupada, because he was able to give the whole 10th canto in the Krishna book in such a way that people can actually digest it and understand it. Many people come and they buy it. Sometimes they buy that book as the first book of any of the Vedic literature or anything about the absolute truth that they've ever come to learn about. It's the first book that they grab, but still from that book they're able to gradually come to Krishna consciousness, even though it's starting with the topmost thing, because Prabhupada is giving it in the perfect way, explaining it all just so that we can understand it nicely. So are there any comments or questions or additions?
Okay, so I had two. So how do we then view, very nice class, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful visit. Please come back again. It's very nice hearing you and Amoga chuckling till late in the night. Yeah, you're a very nice devotee. It's been very nice spending time with you.
Thank you, Prabhu.
The 11th and 12th canto, so where would they be on, the face as Krishna? Does it continue on past them, that metaphor? And then how do we regard those cantos, knowing that Prabhupada, finished, sometime during the 10th canto?
Yeah, we still read through the whole Srimad Bhagavatam, and the devotees who are finishing it are doing that still under Prabhupada's guidance. So it's the whole thing is perfect all the way through. So we read through the whole thing. But has anyone heard if that metaphor continues?
His
like
hair
the
and his
crown
turban?
His
His peacock feather?
I was just going to say that I think the point of the I think the point of the analogy or example is, don't just jump to the 10th canto, start at the first canto. So I don't think yeah. So, but I think that's the point. So I don't think it's like the 5th canto is like the waist of the Lord or something like that. I don't think it really extends past that. That's my understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the point of it.
Okay, right. I was trying to glorify the 11th and 12th canto. I didn't want him to feel left out. So, okay, so bear with me with this. You have a question, Dravida?
No, I just wanted to make a comment about 11th and 12th cantos, since I had the great opportunity to work on those, the latter part of the 11th canto and the whole 12th canto. And we shouldn't ever forget that the 11th canto has the Uddhava Gita, which is Krishna himself speaking to Uddhava. So it's kind of an elaboration on the Gita. A lot of the same, instructions are there, but it's very enlivening. This one little vignette. I happened to read the 11th canto before I even heard of the Hare Krishna movement. Believe it or not, the Ramakrishna mission. It's Yatama Tatapat. Means that, well, whatever way is it. So there were some in the line there, students of Ramakrishna who were Bhakti, who were into Bhakti. And so there's some whole books that are on Bhakti, and one was this 11th canto, believe it or not. It was translated by Nikhilananda, one of the guru who Prabhupada met, the uptown gurus. He went to see. And as Prabhupada said about the Gita, the translations are basically the same. I don't know if you know the history of how the Gita was produced, but Prabhupada, he was dictating, and then he was typing it out, and then he started dictating. And Hayagriva was working on it after the abridged came out. And he was trying to, consult with Prabhupada on the translations. And this was when Prabhupada had his stroke, and he had some period where he was in Stinson Beach, north of San Francisco. He was recuperating there, doing the first Rath Yatra. He wasn't actually able to attend. Hayagriva was there, And he was coming and working with him and asking him this and that. Finally, Prabhupada said, don't worry so much about the translations. The most important thing is the purport. That you can use these translations are basically okay from the other people. Even if they're Maya bodies, the translation is basically the same, you know. So that was, Prabhupada said that, and therefore he started bringing in some things from these other translations. And most of it was okay, we went through it, you know. But the point is that this other translation of the Uddhava Gita was so inspiring when you get to it. You know, he has this little book, what is it? Understanding from the natural way, where Krishna gives all of these analogies about you should learn from the dog, you know, faithfulness. You should learn from the earth, tolerance. You should learn from the mountain, the steadfastness. You know, how you can just have the nature itself can be your gurus in many ways when you understand. And anyway, just to let you know, the Bhagavatam does go on in the 11th and 12th cantos. And the final thing I'd say, Prabhupada's Krishna book, as you mentioned, I'm just reading the Prayers of the Personified Vedas, you know, chapter 87. And it's so, the philosophy is so thorough in Prabhupada's explanation. That chapter is a work in and of itself. I remember when we came to that 87th chapter, which, by the way, was done wholly and solely by Gopi Puranadhana Prabhu. You can see, you know, he did the purports and everything. And it has its own Mangalacharan. So many of the commentators means it's a major work, this 87th chapter, and they wrote, you know, introductory verses like we have in the CC and the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, meaning that it's a whole philosophical work in and of itself. And Prabhupada drew from those many commentaries. That's why it's huge. It's like 10 times like bigger than any other chapter in the Krishna book. And so, as you mentioned, if people just read through the Krishna book and they get to that chapter, they're going to get the full dose of you know, advanced philosophy in many different ways. So the Krishna book is, you know, thorough. And one thing about these prayers, I'm just reading ahead a little bit, Hansa Yogi prayers, so philosophical and so understanding. But then what happens is, with Daksha, who, you know, has a tendency to get a little material. After all, he's expert at reproducing, you know, so he's involved in that. So after this comes this whole thing with the Haryasvas and the Shavalasvas, his 10,000 sons who were meant to, you know, be progenitors, and they go off to perform austerities, so they'll get qualified. But who comes along? Narada Muni. And he convinces them all to take sannyas. So Daksha says, what is it? So in other words, Narada Muni, he starts being angry at Narada Muni after all these prayers, because his whole mission, you know, is really involved with this propagating and everything. So he's prone to that. Then he has another 1,000 sons who he sends off. Same thing happens. Narada Muni says, you should follow in the footsteps of your exalted brothers. And off they go. So Daksha says, again, and he curses Narada Muni to not be able to stay at one spot, you know. And Prabhupada says that the parents of my disciples have also cursed me, that I can't stay anywhere, that I have to always travel because I took their sons, you know. So what does he do? He has daughters. Narada Muni is not going to mess with the daughters. So all of the different, and these daughters, they propagate all different kind of species and everything. So this is finally his reconciliation. But what's interesting, that one thing I was thinking, because these prayers are so rich in the philosophy and everything, you know, but when it really comes down to it, Daksha kind of loses it again, you know, cursing Narada Muni, you know, just like he got angry at Shiva, you know, he had this whole episode in the 4th canto. So it's interesting how the kind of service you do, and Prabhupada has given us so much service that's wholly and solely transcendental. In other words, you know, just one. I'm sorry, I'm taking his time, but in the beginning of the movement, you know, money was not so evident. You know, so at one point, Prabhupada had everyone go out and get a job in the LA temple, and for I don't know how many days they were working in some factory. You know, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj talks about it. He says, we can't do this. You know, it's too degrading. You know, so let's just go out on Harinam. We'll go out on Harinam and we'll take some BTGs and we'll somehow manage that way to raise money. And at first it was very austere. They would come back with $10, $7, you know. It's not going to... But Krishna sent, people... I mean, the stories were, we can't pay the rent, let's go on Harinam. And this happened, I swear. $100 bills were blowing on the sidewalk, and he picked them up, and it happened. Just relying on Krishna like that. So it's an evolvement, and all of these prayers are conclusive. There's so much about the super soul. It's very instructive. But Daksha himself had a tendency to, get a little conditioned and have a problem. You'll see as time goes on.
Jai, thank you, Prabhu. We can see in the Bhagavatam, I haven't done the calculation myself, but I've heard it described before that the sections where the prayers are is very vast. I think, someone may have said that it is like the majority of the Bhagavatam you could separate for these sections of the prayers. So they're extremely important, and they're very rich. There's so much in them. So we can know when we get to these parts of the Bhagavatam that there's actually so much to get out of it, and really prepare ourselves to read it very scrutinizingly and with other devotees and ask questions on it, because there's so much in these sections of the prayers. Are there other comments or questions? Oh, anyone online?
Yes, I have a question. May I?
Yes.
Yes, Rishi Prabhu, no?
Yes.
Yes,
Rishi Kumar.
In the purport to the text you chose for today, text 25, I see that in the last sentence, that the living being, even if advanced, cannot understand the Supreme Being. End quote. But what I see in chapter 4 of Bhagavad Gita, as it is, entitled Transcendental Knowledge, in text 1, is that Lord Krishna himself is saying, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, Vivasvan. So, based on all of this, my burning question is, if I may, if we all know that how advanced Vivasvan is, but in accordance with the quote from the purpose to the text you chose for today in Srimad Bhagavatam, I see that even if advanced, the living being cannot understand the Supreme Being. So why did Lord Krishna present Bhagavad Gita to Vivasvan?
Well, if we understand the Bhagavad Gita, then we can understand who Krishna is, but we're seeing in the rest of the sentence, cannot, even if advanced, cannot understand the Supreme Being, the Personality of Godhead, for He is ananta, unlimited, with all six opulences. So Krishna is speaking the science by which we can come to be reinstated in our position as His eternal servant. We're always serving Him, but how we can again directly serve Him, and in this way come to know Him. But He is ananta, He's unlimited. So even Ananta Shesh, who has so many hoods and mouths, and he's been chanting the glories of the Lord forever, still he hasn't come to the end of describing Krishna. So we can't know Him in full or describe Him in full, because even if you did, then His qualities keep going. So we wouldn't be able to keep up. So He's unlimited. He's ananta. So we can't know Him in full, but He does reveal Himself to the devotee to the degree that the devotee agrees to surrender to the Lord.
So are you saying that Bhagavad Gita is not the all in all about God, that there is much more to be learned?
There's always much more to be learned.
There's always much more to be learned about Krishna, and the Bhagavad Gita is showing us how we can come to know him and engage in his service.
Like the preliminary stage of learning.
Yes, the
Prabhupada said that.
Prabhupada said the ABCs.
Yeah, but it's essential.
But it's essential, yeah. Yes, Prabhu?
Yes, so Lord Krishna was teaching to Vibhajvan the ABC about himself.
Yes.
Okay, Prabhu, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you.
This is actually this one further thing. This is actually a good point. As soon as he asked that question, I read this. Even if advanced cannot understand the supreme being, the supreme personality of Godhead. So the idea is cannot, as you explained, fully understand, completely understand. But then, when you read chapter 7 of the Bhagavad Gita, what does Krishna say? I'll just read the English. The Supreme Lord said, "Now hear, O son of Prita, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. I shall now declare to you," into the second verse, "I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge, both phenomenal and numinous. This being known, nothing further shall remain for you to know." So Krishna speaks like that. But then in other places you say he doesn't even know everything about himself. Because at every moment he's also expanding, and so it's one of these achincha beta beta tattva things. We have to try to know as much as we can in the proper way. So Krishna will reveal as much, but we can't ever think that we can know everything about Krishna, because he's infinite, as it says, ananta. It's endless, and as you mentioned, ananta seish is glorifying him and never comes to the end. So it's a paradoxical thing. We need to try to understand the truth, and we can understand so much by Krishna's words and by proper behavior in bhakti. But we should never think that now I understand in full. I know everything about Krishna. That's foolishness. There's always more to learn.
And Prabhu, if I may, I liked it when Rishi Prabhu said, more or less in the beginning of his class, that in accordance with the quantity and the quality of our service, he reciprocates.
Yes, he reveals himself to the devotee.
Yes, he reveals himself. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Dravida Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hari Bol. So the most important way of serving the Supreme Lord, and which he then begins to reveal himself to the devotee, is by chanting the holy name Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we try to do this very attentively. We must actually do this very attentively, incessantly, but specifically every day, 16 rounds chanting Hare Krishna very attentively, following the regulative principles. And also very attentively studying Srila Prabhupada's books, which are so beyond perfect and wonderful, as we're doing right now. So Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.